so today we're going to be building this 6.7 short block. We got the cylinder head at the machine shop, getting the steam ports drilled in and getting the head surface like we had talked about. We're also going to put the new valve springs in and the new valve guides. So I have my buddy here, Cody. This is his first time assembling a diesel engine, and he's going to be doing most of it. I already checked the bearing clearances with a T-bore gauge and a outside mic, but we're gonna do plastic gauge as a last check. We've already cleaned this block. I wanted to get it on film, but it got too dark. Basically, you want to use hot soapy water and a bunch of bore brushes. Cody, can you grab those bore brushes? This is a Moroso kit. I got it on Amazon. I think it was like $32. Basically, you just want a hot soapy water with all these bore brushes, the cylinders, the oil galleys, especially the main oil galley and all the oil squirters, the cam squirters, and the main bearing feeds. And then as soon as you're done, hose it out, rinse it out real good, and then you're going to want to make sure that you put dry it off with like an air gun, like a blow-off nozzle, and then you want to spray it down. We use the ATF in the cylinder walls and WD-40 everywhere else. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to do before you install these mains is what Cody's going to do. You want the bearings installed on a dry main journal. So I use microfiber, that way you don't leave any residue behind. You're going to want to do all 7 of them. Then we will be installing the Molle Clevite bearings. It is part number MS-2328P. Just a factory replacement bearing. Now there is one, look out Cody, right here. This is the thrust bearing. See how it's machined? You can't mess that up. Now one of the things I always hear about a lot is how the oil hole in the bearing doesn't perfectly align with the oil hole in the journal. That's a built-in restriction, and it's supposed to be there to limit the oil flow. It helps create that pressure. Now you can't mess this up. It says upper on the bearing. I know it's probably really hard to see, but it does say upper, and you want to put the notch where the notch is. Really hard to mess it up. Alright, so all 7 of the uppers are installed. We are not going to be using assembly lube yet. We're going to use plastic gauge, and you don't want any assembly lube taking up space because the plastic gauge is used to check for that bearing clearance. So what we're going to do, install the crank, install the uppers, lower caps, torque them to spec with the plastic gauge in. Just make sure you do not spin the crank.
Yeah.
So as Cody just found out, these cranks are freaking heavy. I swear the 6.7 is heavier than the 5.9. Yeah. Always good to have 2 people. If not, what a lot of people do is they'll take a belt, like a serpentine belt, and wrap it around these 2 cylinders, 3 and 4 rod journals, and you can drop it in that way if you don't have 2 people. Now we're going to install the main caps with the new bearings and the plastic gauge on the top. Being careful not to spin the crank. Alright, is it red now?
Yeah.
Alright, so just like any Cummins, when you do the main studs, you want to make sure you put ARP assembly lube on the stud. On these main studs, they didn't come with washers, so there's like a integrated washer nut. Put it on the underside, and then install the caps. Take a like a wooden part of a hammer, and you line up the dowels, and you just smack it to get the dowels in. And then same torque sequence. Cummins is like a circle, so you'll do the journal here, 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 here. If you actually look at the head stud torque, it's the same pattern. And then it's 125 foot-pounds. You want to make sure it's a nice smooth torque. You don't want to jerk it. Just like that. And on an engine stand, it's a little harder because you got to kind of put one foot to stop it from moving. But basically, you just work yourself around until it's 125 foot-pounds on all these main studs. Oops. And just be careful, this block is now machined. Everything is razor sharp, and it'll hurt you if you're not careful with your knuckles. And you'll feel the stud kind of give way a little bit as you're torquing it. That's normal. At least every truck I've ever done has always done that, especially on head studs. And after this, we will pull all the main studs back out, check our plastic gauge, and then we will put the assembly lube on all of the bearings. Make sure our bearings are nice and clean before we apply the assembly lube. Gotta be careful, even the oil on your skin can kind of throw it off. You want it as clean as possible because that's going to be the lube getting your engine through that initial startup. Is it recording or no?
Yeah, it's recording right now.
Are you sure?
Yeah, dude, I'm sure. This conversation is being documented. There's proof of what's going on right now on this camera. And I'm going to take a piss back here. That's on camera too.
Alright. So, we torqued all our main caps to spec. And I have this specification saved on my phone. For crankshaft bearing clearance, you want between 2 and 5 thousandths. With the plastic gauge, we got like some 3.5, some 4. Plastic gauge to me is a great final check. I installed the caps, torqued them, and then I use the T-bar gauge like I showed you guys in the earlier video and that micrometer. And the plastic gauge is showing exactly what the T-bar, it's really hard to see, but basically you're going to take the plastic gauge and you're going to cut it to the width of the bearing. Then you're going to install all the mains with no assembly lube at all, torque it all to spec, take it all back off, and then use the little cheat sheet ruler that they give you, and you just measure how thick that strip got crushed. So 3.5, 4 thousandths is perfect. The factory specs 2 to 5 thousandths, so anywhere, you know, within that 2 to 5 is good. I like to try to shoot for the middle on oil clearances. Ring gaps, will go into that when we do the ring gaps. That's kind of depending on what you're using the truck for, what you want out of it, determines that. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to pull this crank back out. We're going to apply the Stay Lube engine assembly lube with Moly Graphite by CRC. O'Reilly sells it. I use it on all my builds. Hamilton told me this is some good stuff, and I've never had a cam failure or a bearing failure, and I beat the hell out of my shit. So this is the stuff. You want to make sure you put a very, very liberal amount on all the bearings on as you're installing it, and also on the cam. It goes on the inside of the bearing, this side. The back side stays dry. So as you can see here, we pulled the crank back out. That is the Moly lube applied. Make sure on that thrust you put it on the thrust sides as well, and that's what it'll look like. Then you're ready to drop the crank in. Before we do that, we're going to install the oil squirters in all 6 bores. It's a lot easier to do it with the cranks out. It can be done with the crank installed, just a lot easier having it out. Alright, so we installed the assembly lube on the lower main bearings, torqued them to spec, and all you're going to want to do is just take the crank in my hand. It should rotate relatively freely, just like this. If it's binding or you can't turn it by hand, many things could be wrong, but my first guess would be to make sure that your dowels on the mains are actually seated in the block. They're like an alignment dowel similar to that on like the cylinder head or the transmission adapter plate. And then from here we're going to move on to ring. We're going to gap all the rings, and then we'll install the pistons onto the rods, and then we will install the rod and piston assembly onto each journal, all the while putting in the cam tappets. A lot easier to get to the cam tappets. The reason why I don't do it now is because when I actually measure the ring gaps for the blocks, I flip the engine all the way over, and if you did that, all the tappets would fall out. So we will get this thing flipped over and we will start doing ring gaps.
Alright, what are I using?
Yeah.
Is your battery dying? Shit.
Alright, so what you're going to want to do, take the upper piston ring off. This is the top one. The E faces up. These are Molly rings. And basically, I don't have a piston squaring tool, so what I do is I leave the second ring on here, and I basically put the ring very shallowly in the bore. Here, I'll just do it on camera. So when you pull these out, you want to twist them and pull them up. These rings are extremely brittle. If you twist them, they will break. So when you install them, I do this like that, twist them in, and I push down, and you kind of want them somewhat even, and then I take the piston and I push it down to right there, and that's about an inch. Plenty of room to far enough down. And so right now we have to determine what the piston rings are. Just gonna take a wild guess. Okay, so 19 thousandths on that one. Hand me my phone. So for a 20 over engine, you want 11 to 23, and that's from Quickserve, and then Dodge is 10 to 14 thousandths. So this one is, what did I say? 19. 19. Let me flip this around. Okay, so we're at 19 on this one. Pretty easy. So we'll check it with 20. 20 still slides in. So now we're at 21. Okay, so 21 barely fits. So per Quickserve, we can go 23 thousandths. Now, the larger the piston gap right here, the more heat it can take before the ring actually butts. So what that means is when the ring collapses on itself, and that's how you get a broken ring. When this ring swells so much that it butts like that, it has no room to go expand anymore, so it hits the cylinder wells and it'll break the ring. Sometimes it'll break the ring land on the piston, but usually this is your cause of a broken ring. Now, depending on horsepower, depending on nitrous, depends on how you set these ring lands. Ring gaps. This is a performance daily driver. 21. Not awful. I'm probably going to go to 23. It's going to lead to a little more oil consumption, but it's going to be a lot more forgiving on the extreme heat this engine's about to do. So before you start filing any rings, you want to check them all. So cylinders 2, it barely fits. Cylinder 3, it's harder. Cylinder 4 is hard. 5 is hard. 6 is the easiest. So just like I was explaining on my race truck engine, these engine bores are not the same. Alright, cylinders 5, 6, and 1 have more piston to wall than 2, 3, and 4. and that has to do with the heat. Cylinder 6 is always the hottest. 5 and 1 are also extremely hot. So we opened them up about another half thou piston to wall, which is why the ring gaps are different. So these ones are hard to fit the 21. The 21 fits much easier in 1, 5, and 6. So we're gonna go ahead and trim them up a little bit. To do that, you want to make sure once you trim it that you don't do anything, you put it back in the same hole. Alright, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna come over here. This is a Summit ring filer. Thanks, Cody.
Yep.
Right here. Sorry about the lighting, guys. And what you do is you hold it square. A little bit goes a long way. Now, it creates a ridge on this here. So what you do is you take a flat file and you just want to knock off that spot, that little burr on the ring. Take a file. Now, you also want to just check that edge like that, and that's it. So this is a really tedious process. Then you come back over here and you put it back in the same hole. You go ahead. Where are my feeler gauges at? Square the ring back up. Can't believe we're listening to First Daughtry. Cody's single, likes long walks on the beach.
Nope. Fuck no.
He also likes a nice man's comfort every night.
Well, that's besides the point.
Yeah. So, no. Make sure you find yourself a good truck buddy. They're hard to come by. So we'll go ahead and check the 22. So we didn't even take off 1,000. So it's just this tedious process. So we're gonna go ahead and set all these to 23 on the top ring, and we'll be back. So what Cody's doing is putting the piston rings on. We checked them all. We are at 23 thousandths on the top. We are at 50 thousandths on the second. And the oil control ring, I don't even remember, but it's good. There was an incident. There was a spider, and I stomped it and broke a piston ring, the second ring. And we'll have to get a new kit. But then once you file the ring, I like to put the piston where you filed it. And then we'll go ahead and basically we're gonna push the wrist pins out, put the new Hazley shop peen 12 valve rods in with the 12 valve rod bearings, and obviously we're only going to be able to install 5 pistons, but that's alright. Lesson learned. Offset your rings. I set the oil control ring over the wrist pin. The second ring needs to be 120 degrees away, and then the top ring is 120 degrees away. So you want to stagger these rings. Like so. Install your rod bearing, and then this is just a cheap ring compressor tool from O'Reilly's, also called O'Reilly's. Open it up. Slide it over. Tighten it up. You want the long side of the rod towards the oil cooler here. This is number 6. You just want to drop it in. You already measured rod clearance. Assembly lube. Now the piston will say front on it. So obviously, I like to do it almost horizontal like this, so I can guide the wrist pin in. Not wrist pin, rod journal. So I just take a little screwdriver in there. Pull the rod over. And then I take a hammer.
Hold up. There's a screwdriver. Oops, sorry.
This is why it helps to have 2 people. You good?
No. Alright, good. Alright, coming up on the journal. Seated.
Alright. And then you just install the lower bearing into the rod cap. Now since these are the Hazley ones, microfiber, and that rod bearing, it's on the box. And then same thing, you install the notch with the notch. Assembly loop. I like to install the piston pretty much at top dead center of the crank stroke. Torque them spec. That's how you install the pistons. After you've gapped all the rings, and we just used plastic gauge to verify everything.